What's happening, YouTube? It's Simon 466 Cards, and today we're going to talk about GemRate data, and specifically, we're going to talk about why I think some of GemRate's data is biased data. Now, if you're unfamiliar with statistics and data terminology, you might be thinking that I'm taking a shot at GemRate and Ryan, who runs GemRate. I am not. Biased data is a specific term that has a specific connotation in the world of data, and I will explain that at the end of the video and what this all means. But let's take a step back. What am I talking about? How did I get here? So on your screen right now is the April data from GemRate's IG page. So shout out to Ryan, and GemRate always has amazing data. In one of Neo Cards and Comics' reviews of the April data, he noticed something very interesting, and I honestly didn't notice it until he pointed out that CGC's GemRates for sports cards are way lower than everybody else's GemRates for the 2020 era, right? And like you can see, everybody else, it begins with a 4, 5, 6, 7. It's in the 30s for CGC, and so what's going on there? Why is that happening? And Neo posited, like, are their grading standards too tough at CGC? What's going on there? And so I thought that actually is a very reasonable comment to make, and that is very interesting. Let me look into it. But looking at this page is a little bit difficult because it mixes sports and TCG cards together, and I think that we should separate them and view them differently, right? So that's what I decided to do. Instead of looking at this one chart, I looked at, first of all, sports cards. And so you can see here I've just taken the data from the previous page. I've just taken this data and stripped out the TCG stuff and moved it all into a table, ordering it by the decade and then by the GemRates for each category, for each grader for sports cards. And so if we do that, you can see here on the right, CGC is lagging behind in GemRates for sports cards basically from the 1990s onwards. I think in the 80s, I think it's a little bit too close to call. Like the differences are between 1% and 3%. Like I'm not gonna lose sleep over that. But very clearly for the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and 2020s, CGC is lagging behind every single year. Whereas PSA, which is in the red PSA, Beckett in the blue Beckett, SGC in the tuxedo line here, they're all above CGC. And so if we were to take Neo's theory that this is because grading standards are too high, this is great evidence that they need to loosen their standards at CGC, because there's no reason that they should be having this much of a difference on their GemRates compared to the other three major grading companies. But the thought I had was, if CGC grading standards are too high, you would expect to see the same pattern on TCG cards where they're last as you do right here on sports cards. So then I said, well, let's go back to that previous table and focus on the TCG cards and strip out the sports cards and see what the data looks like. And so that's what I've done here. And you can see also, like, the GemRates for the 2020s are very high overall. But what you see now, it's not CGC in last. It's SGC in last every single year in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and 2020s, whereas CGC is near the top in 1990s, number one in the 2000s, third place in 2010s, but also third place in 2020s, and that is inconsistent with what we just saw for sports cards. Now it's SGC who has too strong, too high of a grading standard or something. So what's going on here? Why is it that SGC has this problem with GemRates for TCG cards, and then CGC has the GemRate problem with sports cards? Why is this happening? And the answer is biased data. It's a biased sample. And I've now put the sports cards and the TCG cards together in charts side by side. And now I'm going to show you two other data points. These are the number of cards graded each month at each of the four grading companies for their specific type of card. And you can see here, CGC has the lowest GemRates for sports cards and is also the lowest producing grader for sports cards among the big four. TCG SGC is last, and also SGC grades the fewest among TCG cards. And this has historically been the case. Obviously, SGC is coming up here in terms of TCG grading, but you can see year over year they've grown 175%. And the reason that CGC has such a low gem rate compared to the other three companies for sports cards, and why SGC is lagging behind the others for TCG in terms of gem rate, it all comes down to bias data. When we talk about sports cards, nobody sends their cards to CGC. If you're looking to get a 10 because of resale value and you see a card and you check it over and you're thinking this is going to be a 10, you're not going to send it to CGC. You're more likely going to send it to one of these three guys, and let's be honest, most likely PSA, to get maximum value. You only send your, well, not only, but you're more likely to send cards that are going to grade 10 to these three because they're known in the sports card grading space. CGC has basically no foothold in that space. And so if you see a card that you believe will be a 10, you're going to send it to one of these three guys. You're not going to send it here. And that's what leads to a lower gem rate for CGC cards in sports cards. Very similar to that, SGC has not had a big following in TCG. They're not considered a big player in the TCG space. And so it's the exact same thing. If you have a card in your hand and you think it's going to be a 10 and you want to get maximum value out of that, you're going to send it to CGC or PSA or maybe Beckett. But like in the last little while, definitely the top two, you're not going to think about sending it to SGC, because if you want to get the most bang for your buck, you're gonna send it to one of these two guys to get maximum value out of it, because resale value is higher among these two because they're the standard for TCG grading. And that's what will lead to cards less likely to gem to be sent to SGC. People maybe send it to SGC just because they like the card and they want to get it, encapsulated and protected in a holder, and SGC is running a sale where it's $10, $9 to get it graded, and that's how and why the gem rate on SGC is so low for TCG cards compared to the other three companies. It has nothing to do with grading standards. It has nothing to do with any shenanigans. It's just because if you have a card that you think is gonna 10, you're gonna send it to the leaders in the space. You're not gonna send it to the laggard in the space to get maximum resale value out of it. And if you still don't believe me when I say that better condition cards are being sent to PSA because of resale value, then let's hear what Nat Turner has to say about this when he was on the Pokeknowledge Cards YouTube channel.
So when we ask these people why are they grading, it's because they intend to sell the card, and it's because they intend to put it on eBay.
So there you go. People are sending their cards to PSA for resale value, to maximize resale value, which means cards that are likely to 10 are more likely to end up in PSA holders. And I think that makes a lot of intuitive sense, but it's reinforced by what Nat is saying here. And so if you're wondering what the definition of sampling bias is, it's right there on the screen. It's a bias where a sample is collected in such a way that some members of the intended population have a lower or higher sampling probability than others. This is because you're more likely to send a card that you think is going to gem or get a 10 to the leaders in the space, not the laggard in the space. And that results in a biased sample of a population, and that's because they're not all equally likely to have been selected. Because again, if you have a card that's going to 10 or you think is going to 10, you're going to send them to the leaders in the space, not the last place grader in the space. So that's why GemRate data is biased data, and you should not think that every card should have similar chances of getting a 10 or a GemRate. So that's my spiel on biased data and how we should think about data. We can't just think that everything should be equal all the time, because there are cases like this where it actually makes sense that it doesn't. And data is great, but let's just be careful about how we think about it, and why there are times that using it improperly can be dangerous and can lead to you drawing the wrong conclusions. I previously made a video about other uses of grading data and GemRate data. I will link to it in the description below, where I had to point out that you have to make sure you're using the data correctly, because if you're not, you're going to draw the wrong conclusions. So that's it for the video. Would love to hear your comments and thoughts on the thought that GemRate data is still biased if you use a subsection of it or are splicing it and think about it in a way that is improper. Sometimes on the channel we preview the next video, which we will do right now. Next time we're going to talk about repacks and why they became so popular, and I'm going to give you my theory, which I'm pretty confident in, and that'll be for next time. Thank you as always for listening and watching. I'll talk to you all soon. Cheers.